In the readings today, we see a very important principle at work. The principle that it is not as important how much you give as whether you are willing to give your all. Today, or this weekend, I suppose, my wife and I are celebrating our 28-year anniversary. And this is a principle which applies especially in marriage. Marriage fundamentally is not a 50-50 agreement. Rather, marriage is successful when each spouse is willing to give 100% of themselves to the other. All that they have, all that they are. In a similar vein, next week we will be observing Veterans Day, and we will be remembering all the men and women who have served and sacrificed on behalf of our country. And we may even find ourselves reflecting on the words of Korean War veteran and Purple Heart recipient Howard William Osterkamp, who said, "All gave some, but some gave all." This willingness to give all is reflected in the example of the two widows that we encounter in today's readings. This perspective, this willingness to give all that they have is a perspective that may be challenging to us as Americans, because we live in a society whose defining characteristic may be materialism. And so these readings may challenge us. They may hit us right between the eyes, as it were. When we look at the story of Elijah and the widow in the Old Testament, we may find ourselves shocked or even outraged by the prophet's actions. The widow comes to him and she says, "I'm using the last of my flour and the last of my oil to make a small meal for myself and my son, and after we eat it, we'll probably die because that's the last of our provisions." And Elijah's response is, that's fine. Go and do that. But first make a cake for me. That's shocking. That's shocking to our ears. And part of the reason for that is we may not be familiar with the ancient Near Eastern perspective on hospitality as a supreme virtue. The Israelites, in ancient Israel, hospitality was not merely a question of good manners, but a moral institution which grew out of the harsh desert and the nomadic experience of the people of Israel. And so some rabbis have said that hospitality is even more important than the prayers that one would offer to God. And this is why Leviticus gives the command, "You shall welcome the alien and the stranger among you. The alien who resides with you shall be as a citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself. For you were once aliens and strangers in the land of Egypt." And so there's this very great command or mitzvah that they are to extend hospitality, even if it means taking from their own family. In some cases, this willingness to give all we have may be blessed by God. God may, as he did for the widow, provide for us. He provided for her oil and flour for the entire length of the drought. Her supplies did not run out. But in some cases, we may not see that provision. When we look at the widow in the New Testament who Christ encounters at the temple, we're not told what her fate is. We're just told that she gives all that she has. And we as Americans, we certainly practice hospitality, and we certainly give charitably, but frequently we approach this from the perspective of we must first care for our own families, and then perhaps provide hospitality for someone else. Or perhaps we approach it giving from our surplus rather than giving all that we have. C.S. Lewis had this to say about giving. He said, "I am afraid the only safe rule is to give more than we can spare." In other words, if our expenditure on comforts and luxuries and amusements is up to the same standard common among those with the same income as our own, we are probably giving away too little. He says there ought to be things we should like to do and cannot do because our charitable expenditures excludes them. And in the gospel reading today, we see this. We see that Christ is at the temple and he's observing all those who are giving large amounts, and then he sees the widow come and she opens up her purse, or whatever passes for a purse in those days, and there's 2 coins in there, and she takes her 2 coins and she freely gives them. And he calls the disciples to them, and he makes the point that she has given more than everyone else. And that's because he's introducing to them a new economy, a new way of looking at giving, a new way of looking at God's provision. In a similar manner, Jesus, when he encounters the rich young ruler, the rich young ruler comes to him and says, I've kept the commandments my whole life. What must I do now? And Christ says, well, if you want to be perfect, first give all that you have to the poor, and then come and follow me, and your reward in heaven will be great. What he's offering him fundamentally is an exchange where he takes all of his earthly wealth and earthly possessions and exchanges it for treasure in the kingdom of heaven. Now, I want to make something clear. I'm not speaking primarily just about giving our money. I'm not here to talk to you about the first collection or the second collection or the bishop's annual appeal or anything like that. I'm talking about a principle by which we are willing to take all that God has given us and give it back to him. A recognition that all that we have, our life, our breath, our families, our ability to provide for our families, all of these things are gifts from God. Freely we have been given, and so freely we can give. God wants for us to be stewards of his wealth, not managers of our own. And notice as well that when Christ asks for someone's all, he's not asking for just their money. He says this, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. And this is the new economy which we are being offered. We give all that we have in exchange for all that he has for us. So our small families, that are our nuclear families that consist of our husband or wife, or 2.5 kids or not, we get to exchange those for a much larger family. We get to be made sons and daughters of God, brothers and sisters of Christ who will rule and reign with him as co-heirs. Our family gets to be all the saints who have come before us and all the saints who will come after us. We're made a part of a new and larger family. It's a good exchange. In the same way, he says, if we give up our mortal life, he will give us life eternal. It's a good exchange. Jim Elliot was an evangelical Christian missionary. He and 5 others were martyred during Operation Aka when they attempted to bring the gospel to the Indians in Ecuador. He said this, and it's stuck with me. He said, he is no fool who gives up that which he cannot keep in order to gain that which he cannot lose. Brothers and sisters, today, may we be willing to give all that we have to God so that in return we can receive all that he has for